One of my students has built a program that makes PIO Solver play against itself for thousands and thousands of hands. In today's video, we are going to go over 25 common nitty-gritty spots and see what we can learn from a GTO bot. What does a 6-max cash game full of solvers with face-up whole cards look like? Let's find out right here, right now. If you like the content that we make on this channel, don't forget to check out carrotcorner.com for all of our other educational poker products. Let's get to the video. Okay, we have the PIO Solver backdrop. Hero GTO is our protagonist for today. We're good to go, locked and loaded with the Ace-5 offsuit on the button. Go for the open after everybody else folds. GTO 6 makes the call with the Jack-10 offsuit in the big blind. Ace-Ace-Jack, pretty standard range bet board here. I would just go for small bet with everything. You don't want to go big on this texture, of course. On the turn, I think this is going to be optional. You can either bet 75% pot or check here. We do decide to check back, which looks like a decent play. And the 8 of clubs rolls off in the river. For GTO 6 here, I guess there's going to be a bit of lead. I would imagine that B75 is just about okay with this hand, but more commonly block is going to be the sizing. We do go for this half pot here. I'm not exactly sure what sizes the student has programmed into the sims, but this looks totally reasonable as well. And this looks like a pretty standard... I think call against this sizing with Ace-5. With a bit of a bigger kicker, we're probably going to start raising. Oh, we do actually go for the raise with this combo. That's interesting. I guess with this sizing, the solver is mainly just building Jack-X. It's going to have a little bit of Ace-X maybe, but not enough that we need to worry about it. This is super villain dependent. It really depends how we think people are building here. Pretty close spot. They go for the bet call and we win a nice pot here. Don't worry about who the chips get pushed to. That's a little bug in the software that we're going to iron out in the future. And yeah, this pot is obviously ours. We do win here. Okay, so this time we are in the big blind with the King Queen of clubs. GTO 3 opens the hijack with Ace King off, and we decide to 3-bet King Queen suited in the big blind. We could also just call here. Both plays are going to be totally fine. Flop is Jack Jack 4. This is going to be a really good board for our range. As the big blind 3-better, it's not going to be as good as normal as if we were small blind, because we just have a bit more of a polarized element to our range here. We might have some King X suited or Ace X suited that we don't have as often from small blind, but we're still doing pretty well here. I'd imagine we're just going to go for quite a lot of big bets here on the flop, so we do go for a big bet this time. Totally guessing what's going to happen here, by the way, guys. Have not seen these hands before. The Ace King off decided to slow play pre, a reasonable play, hijack against big blind. Big blind's kind of polar. That call, totally fine to make it. You don't have to 4-bet in this spot. But I'd imagine this is going to be a pure continue with Ace King. I think this hand is a little bit too good to fold here, so they do go ahead and make the call. 8 of spades turn. Looks like an okay hand to keep barreling with. The one issue I might have with this hand is that there are good suits and bad suits here. Ideally, you would rather have diamonds than clubs. Not in this case, because you actually want to unblock this King of Diamonds card here, but ordinarily you would like to unblock the floaty hands that are going to be clubs and hearts here. So having 2 clubs is not ideal, that said, and you also don't block the jack, like by having a spade or diamond here, you're also going to block the Jack X suited, which you're not going to do with this hand. So I'd imagine quite a bit of giving up here. I doubt it's horrible to bluff again, but this looks like a normal give up to me. They do decide to go for a bet here and just turn this hand into a bluff. Kind of interesting. I think when I look at this at first sight, I just imagine that this hand still has quite a lot of showdown value. And this sizing is super awkward. I'd imagine it's the only sizing that was provided here, or maybe there was a smaller one as well. But yeah, the sizing looks a little bit weird. Might be that the sim's a little bit restricted with what it can go for. Kind of surprised that this is a thing. But against big blind, I guess there's just going to be enough combos folding that are better, or enough equity denial going on. Like there's just 2 live cards a bit more often, stuff like that, like suited connectors and things that you can deny equity to that you wouldn't really be able to do against small blinds. So I suppose this makes some sense, but I'm a little surprised that this hand goes for bet here. But yeah, that's why we're here. We want to learn, like, where can we find aggression that most humans don't normally find. I think this is one such spot. Moving on, we have the Ace-4 diamonds under the gun. We go for the open. We're 3-bet here by the pocket potatoes on the button. It looks like we're probably going to either call or 4-bet here. Both plays are just about okay. I think folding is not far off either. We go for the call this time. 10-8-4. Unfortunately, villain flops the uber nuts here, but we flopped a piece that we're not really going to be going anywhere with. They go for the big bet. Really common thing to do on these lower boards in 3-bet pots, where the nut advantage of the button here is just really large. So going to go for mostly call here, I would imagine. I don't think there's going to be a ton of raise being played on this board at all. So we do call, we turn a flush draw, so we're going nowhere now. They go for this tricky, trappy, low SPR check back with the invincible hand. This is a really common theme. I think we've talked about this quite a lot when we talked about how to become the king of 3-bet pots, and I was basking in the glory on the thumbnail. Hopefully I've not seen the thumbnail yet as I record this, but I'm supposed to be portrayed as an absolutely imperial dominant king, so hopefully that happened and I didn't just look like an idiot. But anyway, in that video we talk about how it's important to consider slow playing in low SPR situations with invincible hands and fast playing the ones that are a bit weaker but benefit a bit more from value and denial of equity. This hand really doesn't benefit from folding out much in our range, so it decides to check here and just get its value later. The 4 just has showdown value. It's not a value bet, it's not a bluff. We're just going to be checking this hand, obviously, and now villain is probably going to be going all in. Although it could be the case that with the 10 blocker, the GTO bot actually uses a smaller bet and tries to like get bluff raised sometimes and stuff like that. But yeah, I think all in here is definitely still an option. I guess with these blockers it doesn't like it, or maybe it mixes, I don't know. But I think with something like kings here, all in would definitely be pretty sensible. Not blocking the 10 so hard. And yeah, this looks like a really obvious call. I think we're just unblocking the bluffs, 2 overcards. The ace is going to be an okay card because villain's going to check down a lot of their ace-x here. So we're not going to block a lot of bluffs with the ace. The 4 is obviously going to block no bluffs at all. It doesn't block value either in these positions, but it's better to unblock bluffs than to block bluffs. You're not going to have enough 10x in your range here to just only call that. So this hand is going to have to call for this price. Makes sense. We lose that one, not win it. It seems to push the pot to whoever loses. This seems to be the way the program's currently working. I think the student that made this has actually fixed this by now. I'm still using the older batch of hands though. Okay, ace queen on the button, we go for 2.5x. We're called by big blind. King queen 9 is the flop of the day. We can definitely go for a bet or a check here. It doesn't really matter. We bet small this time and are called by the queen 10. On the turn, this looks pretty mandatory now. I'd imagine we have to bet this combo, and we go for this sizing, which looks good. On the queen turn, obviously the opponent's hitting a bunch of more nutty stuff, so we don't really want to be building overbet for the most part. Also, we should note that our value hands are going to block the calling range if we go for like 2x pot or something, because the calling range will move towards being more queen x heavy. So we go for this sizing, villain calls again, and we river the nuts. So at first glance here, I would guess that there's some phenomenon going on that when we have a boat that unblocks a queen, we want to go for like the incredibly large sizing because a queen is obviously going to be forced to call pretty frequently here. And when we have a boat that blocks a queen, we might go for a smaller one. That would be my hunch. Let's see what we actually do here. Well, we do just go for the massive sizing even with this hand. Okay, so the blocker effect obviously isn't strong enough there. What else could be going on here that makes jam right other than we just have the immortal nuts and jam is usually the right play? I guess nothing. I guess villain does in theory still have some jack 10 here. Probably does have some bluff catchers other than queen x going on here. Queen 10? I mean, this hand blocks value and it blocks bluffs. I guess blocking boats is the main thing we want to do, and many boats do contain a queen. And if this player is jamming a load of their queen x containing boats, then calling with a queen is the best thing to call with. I don't know that jack 10 is ever using this sizing, so having the 10 blocker might just be a negative thing. This strikes me as really close and just indifferent. Yeah, it decides to fold this time, seems reasonable. We have a bluff catcher with trips. What would be some pure calls there other than like, you know, the queen 9s and stuff like that? Maybe something like, sounds a bit weird, but something like ace 9 there might be quite a nice bluff catch. Something like that. I'd probably want to avoid having like one of these dangler cards, like having a jack or a 10. I'd probably want to avoid that. All right, where are we this time? We are in the big blind with the king jack of clubs. It's opened by the button and we decide to smooth call. Could also 3-bet here, of course, that would be fine. Definitely not going to be a fold even against the big c-bet. I think this hand just has a bit too much going for it. Call seems good. Raise at a really low frequency is probably okay as well. Call seems like the main play. Checking the turn, and villain has made a straight. They're going to be betting here 100% of the time. They go for slight overbet. King jack here feels to me like a bluff catcher against the sizing. Like we're probably not beating value. I don't think maybe queen jack can do this actually. Maybe king jack can. Maybe we're like just kind of chopping with the very bottom of villain's value region here. So it looks like a call to me anyway. The other reason a hand like this is probably just a really good call is that you're blocking some of the outs your opponent may actually need to hit here if they have some kind of straight draw. You're also just going to be in a situation here where, well, your hand is just really robust. It's not that vulnerable against villain's bluffs, right? So you're doing pretty well here. If villain has something like ace-king, maybe not a straight draw, but if villain has something like a pair draw like ace-king, you block the out and you cover it basically so that you'll hit 2 pair on that. So looks like a pretty reasonable pure calling hand. 7 on the river, horrible card for range. We're going to check. Villain's going to bet again, I would imagine. They don't go for the bet here. That seems incredibly nitty. Wow. Queen 10 just checking back. Like, okay, I get that solvers are a little bit hesitant to reopen action on the river, especially after loads of big betting. We do have some flushes here. We have like some nut flush draw. We have some 4x plus spade, some 8x plus spade that got there. Maybe some like king queen of spades that got here. I feel with queen 10, like I get checking back a random 10 here, but I would have thought with queen 10 that we'd have to go ahead and value bet there. That's insane. With a spade blocker, it probably starts doing it. This must be super close. One thing I would say is that in GTO, people raise you a lot more when you bet the river. So this solver is conscious of the fact that it will get raised a bit more often than you would expect. And that might be one reason why like not opening the action is a motivating factor there. But yeah, that just seems pretty nitty to me. That really surprises me. I might need to go back and look at some of these in more detail later and actually just explore why it's come to that conclusion. But yeah, that feels pretty tight. Let me know what you think about that one in the comments, guys. Here we go ahead with king 7 of diamonds and call the big blind, king 10-3. We check the flop here over to the 8s and villain goes for a small c-bet. This looks like pretty much a pure call against these positions. I think you could build a bit of raise into your strategy against later position. 5 of diamonds turn, we check, they check back. And river, how good is our hand here? Probably good enough to block bet and that's about it. I don't think we'd go for like a really big sizing here. This is the sizing that seems to be programmed, and yeah, I think this is fine. I wouldn't go too much bigger than this, but I think the size is okay. As for the 8s, should they raise against this? It really depends like how often the bigger hands are going into the bigger sizing. I would think so though with a set. They do go for this raise size. I think this is a bit small. I'd probably program a bigger raise size. If this is the only raise size on the river, that could affect this spot a little bit, and it could mean that this player is more willing to go for thinner value than they would be because they can't get like bomb raised. We're going to have to defend a bunch of our top pair here. This is probably usually call against this sizing. In real life, if you get raised by like a random recreational player in this spot, you're probably just toast and you should fold. But to meet MDF and, you know, to stop villain from just churning away profit effortlessly here, we're going to have to defend a lot of these combos. So the call there is no surprise to me. Okay, so we open the queen 6. In the cutoff here, definitely a bottom of opening range kind of play called by king 10 in the big blind. 10-6 deuce. Think you can go for large bets here, you can go for small bets here. It depends how you want to build your strategy. You can obviously just check here as well. You go for a small bet, which I think is fine. I tend to play big bets on textures like that, but that's not the only thing that you can do. There's other ways to play these spots too. Turn 2 pair looks like a mandatory barrel to me. You can mix in small bets with this hand. By small, I mean like 75% pot. You can also overbet. The way GTO normally plays a spot where you bet the flop small, they call, and then an overcard comes on the turn in a single raised pot, is that you're using 2 different sizes. So you're going to use like an overbet for things like kings and aces and sets and 2 pair and ace queen. And then you're going to have a smaller sizing for things like king queen or queen 9 or something like that, or ace 10 or king 10. Hands that you maybe still want to value bet but don't want to overbet with. Queen 6 I think could go into either sizing. The reason that you could put this into the smaller size could just be that with the queen and 6 blockers, you're just not getting called as often. You do unblock the 10 though, and I think that's a card that's really often calling an overbet here. So overbet's probably totally fine. We do go for the slightly underpot this time. I think it has slightly underpot and slightly overpot as its sizes here. Both are okay. Seems like a mandatory value bet though. Villain calls, 5 of clubs river. I'd guess that we're betting again. This is getting a bit thinner here, but yeah, looks like another pretty clear bet. And villain decides to fold. So one of the differences between this hand and the one where the straight was possible is basically just that in hands like this, there are just fewer combos of really good hands in our range. If we go back to that hand with the straight, because it's a 4-liner, it's just really easy for either player to have a 10, and so the standards for what you need to value bet are going to go way up, especially on the flush river. So this is really just a textural thing, whereas in the hand we looked at just now, while a flush is still possible, it's just way harder for people to have a good hand by just holding one card or anything like that, and so value betting more thinly just makes a ton more sense. Pocket potatoes here, we get 3-bet by the queens. You can 4-bet this node, you can also just call. Both are fine. People miss these kind of 4-bets because they get sucked into the trap of thinking, well, I'm not really getting much value, I'm not in good shape if I get jammed on. But one of the things that people miss in this pre-flop spot is that by 4-betting, you do just generate a lot of really useful fold equity, mainly against your opponent's bluff region. Your opponent's bluffing range here contains a ton of things like king jack suited or king queen offsuit or something like that. hands that, okay, they're not maybe bluffs, but they're like middle of the road hands that might have to fold to the 4-bet, and so you're just going to deny a ton of equity. King Jack, sorry, won't fold if it's suited, but King Queen off and Ace Queen off and Ace Jack off and stuff like this are going to fold. They have 2 overs. Even something like Ace 4 suited, you know, you get to like 4-bet against that, get called, and still be in good shape. So it's not all doom and gloom when you get called here either. Nice thing to do is to suck out on your opponent. Sorry, I've been looking at this from Pocket 10's point of view. Hero GTO's actually got the queens, so we've been sucked out upon here. But the player with the 10s decides to start by checking here. I think that's reasonable. You would mostly want to bet this flop with your range, but it doesn't have to be a pure bet here. Pocket queens checking back. Okay, counterintuitive. Definitely something that a lot of you guys, I think, are never doing. The reason being, it just looks like an auto bet. You get value, you get to deny equity to things like Ace King. It looks really natural to bet there. The idea is, though, that there's not that much urgency. The pot's quite small. Your range wants to do a ton of checking in general against the 4-better, and you still have plenty of time to get the money in later. You may also maximize your EV against some Ace 5 of spades check fold by checking back the flop and letting that hand bluff later. 7 of clubs on the turn. Villain checks again. Is this now mandatory as a value bet, or is it still optional? I would guess you kind of have to bet here. You must be moving in that territory. Although I wouldn't be surprised if it checked again. Like, sometimes GTO just thinks it's way less mandatory to value bet at these low SPRs than we think it is. But yeah, not surprised to see that. 10s here, I guess, is going to slow play, just being completely invincible. It'd be really weird if it was to jam, given what we know about these spots. And then all in for value, running into the slow played nuts. You really don't expect to lose with queens in this node against a human, but GTO 6 is no human. GTO 6 is a tricky trappy solver, and that's the kind of thing that they do. Go ahead and open here. Well, GTO 5 opens, Hero GTO calling with the King Queen. You can do this, you can build a little bit of cold call here. It's mostly going to be 3-bet, there's not a ton of cold call in these positions, but this is an exception. We do decide to call this time, checked over to us. King 7-7 here, not a fantastic board for a cold call range. This is definitely an okay spot though. I think you can start with a small bet here. This player's quite uncapped. They can definitely be slow playing better King X aces, etc. So I'd imagine most of your bets are small here, but you probably can build a big bet as well. Checking back makes a ton of sense. Ace 10 feels not as far up in the range as you would think, but still probably too far up to bluff, I would imagine. No, definitely not. So under the gun, I guess the thing we need to do here is just adapt a little bit more to the tightness of this opening range. Like if this was button versus cutoff or something, or blind versus blind, there's no way this hand is going to start bluffing. It's going to be way too high up and it's going to be checking. However, in these positions, the thing I'm doing wrong there, the thing I'm missing, is that this hand is just way further down than normal. So going for the bluff makes some sense. On the river, we decide to give up this time. That's reasonable. You can't bluff every single time. You know, that's not going to be a part of the game tree where you just always follow through on river. That would mean that you're grossly over bluffing. Some of your hands like this bluff turn because they had outs. The ace actually makes a ton of sense as a bluff on this tripped up board, because on tripped up boards, what's going to happen is that you don't have any draws. Like your flush draw is terrible. It doesn't mean much, but your overcard to the king is like the only way you can actually have a really premium out. So this makes a load of sense. Easy value bet, I would imagine here, or maybe not after the polarizing. I guess with this turn sizing, I need to be a bit careful here that I don't like just butcher every single spot. I'm going to slow down, take my time a bit more. After this, I guess because of the sizing being so big, the bottom of the value region is King X. So when the river range checks here, it's either some King X or some slow play or trap, or it's just nothing. So I guess you just don't really get called by worse in this spot. At least not often enough. Okay, have a nice blind versus blind situation here. 10-7 of spades opening, ace 5 in the big blind. We go for the call. Big bet from the 10-7. Definitely a weird play, something you don't see a lot of humans do. But at the end of the day, the 3 is quite rare. There's still a big overpair advantage here. I guess you can use some big bets. Ace 5 is going to be going nowhere. But I doubt we're ever raising a hand like that against the large sizing. You possibly could against a lazy range better, betting a third of the pot. You possibly could raise that hand. 7 turn, I think they can play this as a big bet. I think they can play this as a block, and I think they can play this as a check. There's lots of ways to go here. They go for the large sizing. This is going to be another really easy call. And the 10 river looks like another easy value bet here. The call down range is probably like mostly 5x pocket pair and ace high here. So I don't actually think you block a ton of call downs. There's a bit of 7x that you block. I don't think a 10 is really in range very much here for this player. Notably, if this player does have like queen 10 of clubs, GTO 6 is going to win with the 10s and 7s, beating the 10s and 3s. Just be aware of that, guys. So yeah, I think another easy value bet. They go for the large sizing. Honestly, our hand looks like a fairly good bluff catcher. The ace is not going to block bluffs on this node, really, because a lot of ace-x hands are just going to be checking earlier. The 5 is going to block boats. It's going to block something like 10-5, although I'm not sure if that bet's turn for that sizing. Probably not. Looks like a decent bluff catcher anyway, this hand. Probably close. But yeah, calls seems pretty logical here. Moving on, we have 6s in the cutoff here. Go for the open. 3-bet by the king jack on the button. Standard so far. Mostly call, possibly a little 4-bet, but I think maybe like 7s or 8s plus for that. Before that sort of denial 4-bet starts coming in, making the opponent fold over cards, etc. So king, queen, 6 here. We start with the check, obviously flopping the set. Pretty nice. This is going to be a high frequency bet. I think mostly just raise with bottom set at this low SPR. Yes, it is less urgent to raise your really big hands, but this board, it's not a way ahead invincible hand. The value you get now is really useful. We're out of position facing a bet. Your urgency to get value does typically go up when you're out of position, because if you call, generally you're not leading the next street, so it can go check, check, and you can actually find yourself all the way on the river there if you're not careful. So raise seems pretty forced here. Villain calls, 8 on the turn. Bet looks like the play. Possibly there's a low frequency of check, but with this many unblockers to high equity stuff, or medium equity stuff like draws, I would just want to be betting. We do go for the check though. I think what's going on here is that in reality, humans are just checking back nodes like this a lot after they get raised on the flop. They're a bit freaked out. They don't really want to open the action. I'd imagine humans are just not doing this. This is just weird. Like, I don't think this happens in the human domain. Obviously, we're jamming. But yeah, weird turn bet with the king jack. I guess our draws are just super high equity, and so villain just decides to do this sometimes. I also think, though, that villain hasn't been programmed with a small enough bet on this turn. I'm getting that sense. The solver's just using this really big sizing a bit too frequently here, so it may just not have the right inputs. Okay, 5-4 in the big blind. We're going to go ahead and call this time. We could also 3-bet. Flop in the gutter. Going to be a pure continue if we face a bet, but we don't. I think you can lead turn here, B75. I think that's fine. Most of my sizes here would be big. You can probably check raise at a really low frequency with this draw as well. But yeah, big bet just seems normal. They call, and I mean, we don't really block many straights here. We don't block any straights here, actually. But that's not really a huge deal. You shouldn't really go straight to that. We do have 5 high. The thing is, in spots like this, if the river is not good for our range and we've already bluffed turn, we won't have a forced bluff on the river. I suspect, though, that we're unblocking most folds here, which are going to be like spades, big cards, etc. We're blocking some combos like 5-6 that are probably calling us. This is probably a bluff. Yeah, we go for this sizing, seems okay. And villain does call with ace queen this time. You might wonder, like, why is it calling with the ace of spades? The idea is that we never bluff with the ace of spades, right? Because it's a negative remover. So having this ace of spades queen is actually quite a good bluff catcher. It's probably unblocking the bluffs we actually are meant to fire on the river, which won't be all of them. We won't want to like bet everything with bet turn with here probably, because we've already filtered villain on the turn. We don't have a range advantage here, but we will want to bet with 5-4, I think. And this hand unblocks hands like this and other hands that bluff. So yeah, makes sense to call with ace of spades. Actually a good card to have on this node, counterintuitively. Getting into another battle here, ace deuce under the gun against our opponent's king queen. Good board for range, going to go ahead and bet really often for a small sizing. Turn, I don't think you can ever bet this hand. I think you need a little bit more going on a turn like a 6, so I'd expect that to go check check. But actually, come to think of it, the ace overcard is something. Like, there's going to be some hands here that are pure give-ups, I would think. I thought this one probably would be that you need a little bit more going on in a texture like this to bet, but the solver thinks that you can do this. I'd imagine this is low frequency though. I guess we have the overcard. Not that we'd have like queen deuce in this position, but it's much better to have ace deuce than queen deuce outs-wise. I'm still a little bit surprised by this bet though. I thought this would be pure check. Villain calls again, 5 on the river. How is this as a triple barrel candidate? I mean, the 5 is kind of horrible, right? Our opponent just has way more 7x than we do. They should probably lead this river sometimes, actually. I guess we just give up most of our hands here. This one, though, it seems to like betting. We've blocker to ace 7, which is something that's going to be one of the main 7s that our opponent has, I guess. We're also unblocking like the top pair, which is probably now the folding range. Stuff like king, queen, king, jack, they don't have ace, king from pre, obviously. So I guess we have like a rare hand that does block some value and unblocks bluffs. So if you're ever going to bluff the river here, which I think should be a rare occurrence, this hand makes some sense. But yeah, really hard for humans to like put that together and find this in game. King, queen decides to call this time. Looks like a bluff catcher, looks like it'll just be an indifferent hand against the bot's river blasting range there. Queen, jack of spades goes with the open, and we get called here. Usually I'd recommend just checking these spots over. You're not going to have a high bet frequency in situations like this. The cold caller's range is obviously doing pretty well against you. They go for a big bet here, and we are going to call, I would imagine. I don't see there being another play. Big bet's a bit weird with ace 10, but it's probably just about okay. There's a lot of like double Broadway combos that call there that are just like gutter / showdown value bluff catchers, and yeah, betting against them makes some sense. Check on the turn, jack river on 4 straight. I mean, there can't be a lot of stuff that we can get value from here, right? Against a more polarized range on the flop. They're really not meant to have a 10 very often, but it goes for the sizing anyway. This feels really thin to me. I don't really like this against a human, because I don't think a human's going to, unless they're a weaker player, I don't think they're going to big bet a 10 on the flop or have like a worse jack or whatever. So this is definitely a weird, surprising play. I would expect just to see check here. Does pay off with ace 10. Who knows, some of these nodes get really, really narrow and the ranges get really precise and snug. Like it could just be that like this particular line is just like a really rare thing with a really small range or something, but this surprises me, honestly. Looks a bit strange. GTO does some stuff that like humans would just never do. I do think against a human, if you bet big on this river, I don't know. I don't feel like you'd do particularly well. I think I'd rather just like bet tiny or check and just hope this player does something silly with a bluff. But yeah, it's a weird spot. Very weird. All right, pocket 10s, 3-bet by ace jack. We're going to 4-bet here pretty frequently. Jack, jack 9. So this player is probably going to do quite a bit of big bet on this flop. Check is fine sometimes. If we are betting here, it's going to need to be fairly small, but I don't know if it's programmed with small float bets here because I've not seen one yet. So checking back seems okay as well. They go for the block bet on the turn. This is really good sizing. This ace is going to polarize the in-position player's range. They're going to have like ace X here, or they're going to have something really, really bad, like 7s or 6s or 5s. So this is definitely a spot where using the small sizing makes a ton of sense. 10s feels like it's already in the blender a little bit here. I think I'd much rather obviously have an ace. I'd much rather have even like king queen is notably better. Probably king queen has similar showdown value to 10s against this, but obviously more redraw. I feel like we have to probably call this hand sometimes though. And then on the river, looks like a pure fold to me. I just don't think this combo can ever be the calling range that blocks bluffs, that unblocks value. It's got to be a fold. Okay, nice and easy one on the river there. No real quandary to be had. Ace 10 of clubs. 3-bet by small blind, and here GTO makes the call. Okay, so 3-bet pot. Small bet. I think just probably playing mostly call here. Raising and reopening with hands with this kind of draw is a bit dicey because out of position at the low stack to pot ratio is meant to jam pretty often, and that's going to cause you to just like fail to realize a lot of your equity. So not surprised to just see the call there. Turn the straight, that's nice. Go for the big value bet. Yeah, it's definitely not programmed with a small enough bet on this node. I think it would be used there at some frequency. And yeah, going for it all. Okay, a few more hands just to get through. We actually cut some of the 25 hands out because they were really boring. So they were like all in pre's and stuff. So I did actually review 25 hands here, but you're only seeing like 21 or 22 of them. So sorry about the borderline false advertising there. But we are going to bring this video to a close after these few hands. It's getting a little bit long. Open the 9s here in the small blind, and here GTO is going to call in the big blind. 6-6-4. I think checking a lot on this board is normal for small blind. We saw earlier it used the big bet here. I would say that's kind of a rare thing. 10-8. This is a hand with backdoors and overs that probably can start bluffing. This is a good board for big blind's range, so with the 8 of hearts especially, I'd expect to see some bluff here, but also some check. So we go for small bet here. Kind of weird, like I think this is more of a big bet situation generally, but small bets they're not terrible or anything like that. It could be that it's not programmed with one, but I think it would be. 9s goes for a check call. I think raise is also like totally fine here, but probably not mandatory. And then checking the turn procedurally, looks like a high frequency bet, but you can probably also check here. Go for the overbet, interesting stuff. Not so used to seeing this on flush turns, but there's nothing inherently wrong with it in this spot. You do have a lot of flushes. So does your opponent, but they're going to have a lot more like overpair, ace king, ace queen. You're just going to have way more polarized range here, so this makes some sense. They decide to call again and slow play. Makes perfect sense because against overbet, like the idea is your opponent's going to be value betting most of their value range on the river anyway and bluffing a ton, so why would you need to raise with an invincible hand that doesn't benefit one iota from fold equity? You wouldn't. And yeah, I can see this hand following through. It's definitely got some good stuff going for it with the 8 of hearts blocker here. I guess it's not mandatory that you can give up sometimes as well, but definitely looks like a reasonable bluff. Dodged the bullet this time. Pocket 7s, 3x here. Man, it's incredibly hard to predict what solvers are going to do because you know what? They're mixing in a lot of spots, and that's what makes it so difficult to actually figure it out. Without seeing the sim, it's really difficult, this exercise. Like, it's draining all of my energy just trying to do this. It's super tough. So this can be one of the 3-bet bluffs, big blind versus small blind. I'd imagine 7s is mostly calling. And then we hit this texture of 10-9-6. Start with a check. Big blind doesn't love this texture. Quite a lot of check back with this hand, I would imagine. 3 of spades on the turn. I think with the pocket 7s here, we can consider block leading or checking again. Check again seems normal. Check, check. And river, probably some sort of bet now is in order, like some kind of block bet or even a bigger bet would be okay. This makes sense. A lot of our opponent's range is now just going to be ace king, ace queen. I'd imagine this hand just has to call. We're just unblocking some bluffs here. With the ace, the 6 is a good value blocker. Yeah, this has got to be a call. Okay. Moving on, ace 10 is opened under the gun. We're going to go ahead and call the 8-9 this time. 3-betting is also fine. We check the flop, they check back. You can lead the turn here. You can also just check and go for either a check raise against some sizing or check fold against some other sizing. You can probably check raise at some frequency with hands like this, so this is fine. You're probably mostly check raising or betting, right? With the nut shot here. You're probably not check folding unless they go for like a huge overbet or something like that. Check, check. This is something you won't see humans do very often, is check multiple times with a hand like the ace 10 here. People are really bad at that. Humans just want to bet the second time. They get greedy, they want their 2 streets, but it is okay to check because sometimes in GTO, big blind is trapping here and you're saving money that way. And sometimes you're just allowing them to bet a hand they would have folded on the turn on the river as a bluff and you're just making money that way. Maybe they even hit like a pair of queens on the river and then you can value bet. So definitely some merit to checking twice here as well. Easy value bet now though. And we've gone for the check. This is interesting because when you're out of position, the golden rule that we talk about in Carrot Poker School, grade 2 lecture 5, when we cover the ins and outs of the out of position game, is that if you can check raise, you don't normally have to bet. And this is one such example. We do go for the check raise here. We get paid off, which is normal. Most of their value bets are going to be calling at a decent frequency. Nice hand. Love the check raise there. Really cool stuff. So open 10s under the gun. Go for the call against GTO 5's small blind 3-bet. They go for a large bet here. I think this will be call only. I don't think there's going to be any raise going on against this. Really polarized range, big sizing, low SPR. Really no need to raise in position. They check. I think you can check or bet small here for the most part. We check back. Jack river. They can't just turn everything into a bluff here. They've lost the range advantage by betting flop and being called. Yes, they still have like some aces and kings. They have some nutty hands. That doesn't give them license to just bluff everything though. Ace king might chop sometimes against other ace king. Like, I don't know. It doesn't have a lot of showdown value, but it probably has a bet. And it certainly doesn't seem to have very good blockers to the good stuff in our range like this that would be calling a bet. So give up makes sense with 10s here. We probably just have a lot of equity by this point, actually. I think overpairs have to either bet turn or river most of the time here, especially on the jack, which is going to dissuade us from value betting as thinly. I would guess you can bet here, but I'd be careful against humans. Like against GTO bots, you can definitely bet here because they are really capped on this particular node in 3-bet pots, but in general, I would be careful about making bets like this. It's probably fine against most people, but just watch out because some weaker opponents will check like a jack there with the intention of check calling, whereas the solver's almost always going to bet that hand. Ace 10 against Queen Jack. This is our final hand of the day. 3-bet, low frequency play by GTO3 here, but fine. We call 7-4 deuce. Not a great board for big blind. Big blind's going to have quite a lot of like Queen Jack off, Jack 10 off, Jack 5 suited, stuff that just whiffs here. Ace 10 looks like it's bang smack in the middle of in position's range, so check back makes a lot of sense. Check check on the turn. Seems normal as well. And this is not a situation where the big blind player like has to now bluff because they don't have showdown value. It's true that they never win with Queen Jack by checking, but in spots like this, I don't know, it might bet this hand, but it might look for like a better blocker. I think it's better to have like the Jack 5 or something here so you're not blocking so many combos to the folding range of in position. You don't have to bluff no showdown value unless you have a range advantage. Definitely not a range advantage spot for the big blind. Let's see what they do. They do check. We're going to check back here. We have the middle of our range showdown value. No need to value bet, no need to bluff. Oh man, that was hard. That was hard work. Not going to lie. Reviewing solver versus solver play, trying to explain and predict what they're going to do, you do feel like you're winging it a little bit sometimes, because like they do the opposite thing, or they're mixing, or they're in like some really like metagame world where the ranges are really narrow. But overall, it does show you what solid play looks like. I hope you enjoyed this. There are going to be some products on Carrot Corner in the next 6 months or so that are to do with this stuff. So you might be able to buy some of these hands. You might be able to buy short videos of like explanations of hands or something like that. It may be part of our subscription service as well that we're launching later in the year. There's loads of stuff we can do with this stuff. I can't wait to actually market some of it. It looks awesome, but I hope you're enjoying this free content in the meantime. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, let me know. Do smash the like button, it really helps. We're almost at 10k subs, guys. Please do subscribe to the channel. You'll get notified when videos come out. That's what you need. You need that email at 5 o'clock every Wednesday and Friday UK time telling you a video's dropped. I really appreciate it if you do. Let's get to 10k subs, and I'll see you on another video very soon. Bye for now.